subscribe and like the video. And as you admitted, in England, nor am I wrong, in Germany, they've only seen growth in a matter of a very short period of time as well. Maybe there's a counterexample that I can't think of right now, but I can't think of a single counterexample. Rosa, the most important country in the EU is going towards fascism, but Europe is not. Yeah, I know. That's the other part of the story, is that when Germany falls, it's over. You are wrong in Germany. I get the general sentiment, but it's not like Europe will be a carbon copy of Hungary or the US. That's just not true. But of course, the situation is dire as you were wrong in Germany. Not entirely, but still wrong. It's not going to go fascist. Yeah, you're not actually providing me a reasonable counter. You're just simply saying it can't happen here, which is understandable. I also understand that feeling where you go, it can't happen here. We can't have mass detention facilities and try to go after virtually every undocumented migrant. It can't happen here. Well, Donald Trump's president again. A lot of the things that you think can't happen here end up happening here. It ends up happening there too. Look at the polls. Look at what's happening here in the last 2 weeks. You don't understand. We'll see. The left in Finland is fighting back after their rightist party won the past elections. People are not liking the austerity over there. That's the only thing that can hopefully fix the situation. Polls just show AFD growing for the past 3 months. Yeah. AFD back in May at their lowest point has swung up to 22%. And as far as I understand, the CDU, CSU is also like going more and more right wing. I mean, they're already right, but they're moving away from center-right politics to more right-wing politics. Like, that's what usually happens. I mean, look at the Democratic Party. It is a almost perfect analog where the Democratic Party capitulates to a lot of the sentiment coming from the far right, coming from the Republican Party. Look at our last election, where the Democrats basically took on an anti-immigrant sentiment, an anti-immigrant narrative. They got comstered for it. The center-right neoliberal parties end up adopting the positions of the far-right parties, or the far-right positions from basically 4 years ago, with hopes that they can retain their status. It's the same with Labour in the UK. It's the same with the Democratic Party in America. And it's the same with CDU in Germany. Democrats lost because they tried to run a woman. Americans are sexist, racist fucks. Yeah, no, that's not the case. The more center-right parties capitulate to far-right positions on immigration, okay, while simultaneously maintaining an austerity regime and not fixing the social safety nets and improving material conditions for the existing labor force in the country, the more the public goes, okay, so I guess like these are the anti-immigrant guys. Why the should I go with this party now? I'm going to go with the anti-immigrant guys who have been right about immigration all along. That's just how it works. It makes sense if you're not paying a lot of close attention to politics in general. And many people don't. Yeah. Also, reform is on top of the charts right now. Like something that I warned about in the immediate aftermath of the predictable labor victory. I said that this would be a massive issue, and it's already occurring. The multi-party systems allow for smaller far-right groups to grow quickly as the extreme side of conservatism, like an escape. Yeah, reform is a rebrand of UKIP. That was a rebrand of BNP. Growing quickly is easy to do, from nothing to a few seats, but they will never directly rule. Yeah, they will never directly rule until they are the ruling party. That's usually how it works. It also rarely ever goes in the opposite direction. It never goes for like communist parties growing. I wonder why. Perhaps because the parties that are in power, neoliberal parties, fear and refuse to cave or capitulate to left-wing parties out of the fear that leftist parties, communist parties, socialist parties are far more disruptive to the pre-existing hierarchy where big business still thrives than the parties are, than the fascist parties are. It is who the domineering parties cave to that actually stand to win the most. And if they consistently cave and consistently capitulate to the far right parties, then people go, okay, well, these guys, we want to shake things up. The system is in a dire situation. Okay. The system is fundamentally broken. We want something. We want someone to shake things up. These guys have basically been signaling to the broader population that that the far right parties are correct on their attitude towards immigration. So maybe we'll go there. Like, you know what this reminds me of? The huge demonstrations in Berlin. The anti-AFD demonstrations in Berlin. You know what this reminds me of? Women's March 2016. Look where that got us.
50,000 people have gathered in Berlin to call on Germany's other political parties not to cooperate with the...
Like, we did this too, chatter. That's why I'm saying Europe is just basically following America's footsteps, just like almost a decade later, okay? You are so wrong, Lamau. It's hilarious. I wrote to you on Discord a week ago offering German perspective, but I get that there's a lot of shit going on in the U.S. right now. We have more than the Democratic Party. I get that you are angry about that, but many countries here do not have a two-party system. Okay. Western liberal democracies that have a multi-party structure still inevitably go back to the same left-right dynamics by building coalitions. Okay? I understand that this creates an additional safeguard, right? So it's not just like either you're all in on the Democrats or all in on the Republicans. And yet, when the party that is the dominating party is considering socialist and communist parties to be a non-starter, then they inevitably create that left-right coalition on the boundaries of, at the very most, a far-right neoliberal administration or a far-right or very right-wing, much more right-wing neoliberal administration that inevitably makes way for the far-right to come in and actually, quote-unquote, change the system, change the dynamic. That's it. Having multiple parties simply forces the hand of the government to create a governing coalition. Also, we had a little thing called the that changed our dynamic. I know, that's why it's even scarier that after the Germany is still entertaining fascism with 22% popularity. That's insane. That makes it way more insane. That's the point. Also, I mean, look at the current governing parties and the way that they rage bait. What do you mean? That's not rage bait. Look at the current governing parties in Germany and how they've dealt with the issue of popular mobilization against the unlimited loyalty to Israel. This is just a loop until we actually get stuck with fascists. Uninspiring centrists refuse to tackle the underlying social problems that lead to the rise of the far right. Stagnating living standards creates fertile ground for fascism. Far right win elections. Far right drives the economy off a cliff, lowers standards of public life, and generally makes everything objectively worse. Uninspiring centrist defeats the far right with a promise of change. And then, boom, back to uninspiring centrist refuses to tackle underlying social problems that lead to the rise of the far right. The thing that this actually does not mention, this cycle does not mention, is that there is a nefarious purpose for this song and dance. And that nefarious purpose is to undermine the existing welfare state slowly but surely, and then privatize as profit, as areas that you can eke out profits become smaller and smaller. You inevitably look to pre-existing publicly controlled sectors to eat away from. And you can't go in and destroy it overnight. That would cause a lot of anger and resentment towards the government. There would be a popular uprising. So what you have to do is, for decades and decades and decades, undermine the social safety nets that causes this resentment and anger to begin with, okay? And then slowly but surely privatize those social safety nets, the government-funded programs, transportation, healthcare, education. It can't happen overnight. People obviously care about these programs. It's just like in America, what do we have? In terms of social safety nets, what do we have? Social Security. The Republicans have fantasized about gutting Social Security for literally a century, since its inception. Okay? They can't do it immediately. They can't do it overnight. They can simply cripple it for years and years and years and years until it gets to a point where you're like, well, it's bankrupt. We gotta pick it apart. Social Security is like the last bastion of competent social safety nets here in the United States. Look at what the current Republican administration is doing while they're cutting, while they're doing fiscal austerity, while they're doing fiscal responsibility politics. They're cutting food stamps. That's what they're doing. Social Security and the existing government-funded healthcare is next. Recently, the CDU worked together with the AFD, and that's why the people are protesting. So this chatter saying it won't happen in Germany, like in the U.S., is just wrong. Yeah, they're stealing funds from FEMA at a time when you know, climate change is ripping through the United States of America.
Just as the Ukraine war approaches its third anniversary, a bombshell move from Donald Trump, calling Vladimir Putin to arrange talks and instructing his defense secretary to give a speech that has major implications not just for Ukraine, but also for the whole of NATO. The NATO alliance has guaranteed European security for almost 80 years, since 1949. And essential to all that has been America's support. Now, for the first time, that is in some doubt. NATO may have expanded, numbering 32 members now, including Sweden and Finland. But the US is still by far its most important member. America has more than 100,000 military personnel deployed in Europe, has air bases, intelligence bases, and naval assets all stationed here. Donald Trump has been pointing out for years that America spends vast amounts more on defense than any other NATO.
What do you see as the solution to breaking the aforementioned cycle of centrism, right-wing politics? A competent labor party in this country, backed by a militant labor movement. That's the only way out of it for every country. What has happened historically must happen again. The only problem is there is no USSR this time around in the build-up to Germany. Like, we've never, I don't know what happens in this process, because there is never, at least historically, there has not been like, Germany was not the nuclear hegemonic superpower when World War II happened. Now imagine Germany, but instead it's the United States of America, with a complex web of security partnerships and allegiances all around the globe, 800 military bases all around the globe, nuclear arms, and they're turning fascist with no USSR. At most, you have China, but China has been more interested in self-preservation and is not shy. I mean, I guess the USSR wasn't shy of making allegiances with fascist movements initially as well, but we'll see what happens.
NATO nation, as you can see here, more than all the other NATO nations put together, with the UK now falling behind Germany into third place. But when viewed as a fraction of GDP defence spending, it looks a bit different. Poland is in the lead, then Estonia, and then America, a flatter line. Now, NATO is thinking of raising its...
Wow. Militant socialist movement. Italy did have one, and we had far more problems in the left in moments that the Brigitte Rossi started the bomb. But when it all stopped, we passed universal healthcare and public education. Militantism is never the way, and history shows that. I love that you're mentioning this as we are talking about NATO. What a fun time to bring up militancy in labor in a country like Italy. Right as we were talking about NATO. Seems very simplistic and not understanding of how multi-party systems work. Most of them will not exist in 10 years, as the multi-party system provide the ability to have new perspective, have more ground, and older get away. The multi-party system is the best way to assure non-loyalty to a party, which is what was militantism. Without labor militancy, we would not have the weekend, brother. What are you talking about? Do you like the weekend? Not the musical artist. I'm talking, the 2 days that you have off. We would not be able to abolish labor militancy. Is the reason for why we abolished child labor, which America is restoring in a very big way. Okay. Weren't several of those bombs attributed to socialists in Italy were actually done by NATO terrorists? Wait a minute. What? Yes, that's the reason why I was laughing when what that chatter was representing as like labor militancy in Italy was actually just Operation Gladio. It's also funny to say fascism will never rise in Europe or in Italy when you got a literal fascist in power right now.
Guidelines for defense spending from 2% to 3%.
Neoliberals or those in positions of power will never cave to demands made that are objectively pro-worker unless they are forced to. This is the same in the United States of America as well. FDR was not a socialist. He was not a communist, okay? FDR was at least smart enough to recognized that the only way to stop a full-blown revolution from occurring in the United States of America was if he extended the capitalist state by offering a lifeline in the form of welfare and the New Deal. He listened to the socialists and the communists. He caved to their demands, and the only reason why he caved to their demands was not because of his socialist streak or whatever, but because he recognized that that was a necessity at the time, and it was due to labor militancy.
Now that still leaves it well short of what Russia is spending, almost 7% of its GDP, so Putin can fight his war in Ukraine. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says Europe must do more to secure itself, and America has other things to focus on, causing concern about America's commitment to the alliance. But it's what he says about Ukraine that's caused the most alarm in the West, even if Russia is probably delighted.
When he says that if there's a peace deal, there won't be any American involvement in keeping the peace in Ukraine, and it must not be anything to do with NATO, I think that's going to have people in Brussels, somewhat alarmed. Fundamentally, I think this kind of a line will go down extremely well in the Kremlin, because what it says is right up front, before any negotiation, we're ready to go along with the idea that Russia can help itself to part of next door Ukraine's sovereign territory.
So even before any negotiations start, the Trump administration seems to be ceding ground to Vladimir Putin. After 3 years of war, it says Ukraine must give up the dream of getting all its land back to the borders it had in 2014.